Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. Now if you're wondering where I've been this month and why there hasn't really been any new content, it's because I've been having some computer issues. It started with a problem with Windows and then it got to a point where I couldn't open my video editor, which really pissed me off because I just completed an hour-long episode of The Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, episode number 60. All I had to do was render and I was going to upload it the next day, and yeah, the editor wouldn't open, and every time I tried to solve the problem, another problem came up, and I was constantly chasing my tail in circles basically. This resulted in me getting extremely pissed off and deciding to take a short break and not think about it or feminism or Twitter for a while. So that's where I've been. And to top it off, a hard drive died in my computer and I had to replace it. So it's been fun times. Now, you're obviously watching a video, so you're thinking I've solved these issues, and the answer is kind of. I've installed a later version of the same software, which now enables me to make these videos again, and also opens up all my previous files except for the Propaganda of Toxic Feminism Part 60. For some reason, it gets about 90% through that file, then decides to crash. And I really don't want to put that video together from scratch again, because that's going to be a major pain in the ass, but I might not have a choice but to do that. Hopefully when I figure out what the problem is with Windows, I'll be able to fix it without building that video from scratch again, because yeah, I really don't want to do that. But now that that's out of the way, let's get on to the topic of this video. Now, as you may have heard, Lawrence Krauss has been accused of sexual harassment quite a bit lately, starting with a BuzzFeed article. And Rebecca Watson put up a video about this. Now, I'll look at parts of that video after my end credits, but considering the topic is sexual harassment and rape, I thought we would have a look at an old video of Rebecca Watson's. It's 3 years old, but everything in it is still relevant. And Rebecca Watson uses her unique brand of logic, which unfortunately is all too common with feminists like her. And she explains how extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Let's have a look.
In a previous video, I talked about false rape allegations, and in that video, I specifically mentioned the fact that the vast minority of rape allegations, at most 8%, but as little as 2%, probably closer to 2%, of those allegations turn out to be false.
Well, Becky Watson isn't off to a good start. The 2% figure is very, very bad. It's actually from a Susan Brown Miller book called Against Our Will, and it was taken from a speech from a judge before a small group of lawyers. And the source of this particular statistic was a single area of New York. And there's really not much more information on it apart from that. So that is not what I'd call reliable in any way. Okay, what about the 8% figure? Well, that's a little better, but still not particularly good. It is commonly attributed to the FBI, but is probably very, very biased. So when Rebecca Watson says that it's a fact that only 2 to 8% of cases are false, more likely 2%, she is actually wrong. Now, I do have some interesting figures from the UK which breaks down the stats in just about every way you can possibly imagine, which is why I like to use these. And it puts it at 12% before prosecution. So before they take the next step of prosecution, the police investigation finds that 12% of cases are considered to be false allegations. Now, I should go into that in a little bit more detail. That's 12% of the cases which are dropped before being prosecuted, and 82% of the reported rapes are not prosecuted. So realistically, it's 12% of 82%, which works out about 10.7% of the overall reported rapes. But let's say that Rebecca Watson is right. For the sake of argument, let's give her the best case scenario. If that's the case, if it is 2 to 8%, that means it's somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 12. I don't know about you, but somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 12 isn't something I'd consider extremely rare, especially the 1 in 12 part. And for the record, it's actually 1 in 12.5, but for the sake of argument, let's just round it up to 12. Now, keep these figures in mind for what Rebecca Watson says for the rest of the video.
And I mentioned that this is just one piece of evidence that you should consider when attempting to determine whether a rape accusation is real or false.
No, every single rape case should be judged on the evidence, not based on some statistics from a 1975 feminist book which quotes hearsay. That's not evidence. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but that is not what a true skeptic would consider good evidence.
This fact caused a lot of otherwise reasonable people to completely flip out. And I found it really interesting and a bit odd because these people are, by and large, skeptics. And skeptics often talk about the problem of probabilities. For instance, one phrase that's thrown around quite often in the skeptic community is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And all of this basically means is that something with a very, very low probability of happening requires a very, very high degree of evidence in order to start to convince you that it may be true. And this is something that most skeptics understand as a truism when it comes to things like whether or not John Edward can really talk to the dead. We know that there is a very, very small chance of that being so.
A very, very small chance. Would that very, very small chance be somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 12? Because if it's not, you're about to make a very, very bad analogy. Comparing something like talking to the dead, which is by its very nature supernatural, to something like false rape allegations, which are in fact part of the natural world and easy to prove, is not a very good comparison, Becky. It's incredibly dishonest. But of course, Rebecca Watson is trying to make false rape allegations into some unbelievable rare thing. She's already reduced the 2 to 8% down to 2%, and now she's about to compare it to talking to the dead and ghosts. That seems reasonable, doesn't it?
And so in order for John Edward to prove that he is one of the few, maybe the only person who can talk to the dead, he would need to provide an overwhelming amount of evidence in order to get past that problem of probability. But once you switch the topic from psychic abilities to rape allegations, many skeptics suddenly give up on their idea that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah, probably because false allegations aren't extraordinary by your own statistics, by your own incorrect statistics, Becky. They are somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 12. I do not consider something being extraordinary if it's somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 12.
And instead, they suddenly embrace this idea that all claims are equally ordinary, regardless of their probability of actually having happened.
Now, as is always the case with feminists like Rebecca Watson, when they're making this argument, they only give you part of the information and they come to illogical conclusions. They start out by stating that false rape allegations are only 2 to 8%. Therefore, the other 92% must be legitimate cases with absolutely no doubt whatsoever, right? I mean, everything's just nice and simple and black and white, and there's no shades of grey anywhere. This is very, very far from the truth. You see, Rebecca Watson doesn't tell us how many reported rape cases result in someone being found guilty and getting a conviction. So let's use those English stats that I mentioned earlier, and they say that the number is 7%. So of all the cases which are reported to the police, only 7% of them result in a conviction, because there is enough evidence to support the accused being found guilty. So as I said earlier, the number of false allegations, using these English statistics, is 10.7%. So there are actually more cases found false than convictions. And even if we use Rebecca Watson's number of 8%, there are still more cases which are found to be false than there are cases which are proven to be factual. So if we add 8% and 7% together, we get 15%, which means there's 85% of cases which are unaccounted for. So what about those cases? Well, they're simply unknown. And this is the great lie that Rebecca Watson and other feminists like her constantly repeat. They include the 85% of cases which are unknown as guilty cases, even though they have not been proven in a court of law. Now, obviously, out of that 85%, there are actual rapists who get away scot-free because there isn't enough evidence, or the case is dropped, or the rapist can't be found, or numerous other reasons. I'm not suggesting for a minute that only 7% of reported rapes are actual rapes. I'm simply stating that only 7% are proven to be actual rapes in a court of law. But if we are going to argue that some of that 85%, maybe even the majority of that 85%, are legitimate cases which just lack evidence, then we have to make the same argument for false allegations. Unless for some reason you believe that the police are extraordinarily good at ferreting out false cases, and they somehow manage to get every single false case and prove that it's false. That would be an extraordinary claim, Rebecca. The simple truth is that both rape cases and false allegations can be hard to prove, for the simple fact that in a lot of cases, probably the majority of cases, it involves two people, alone, with no witnesses, and often no evidence. There might be evidence that sex took place, but you really need to prove that it was non-consensual sex. And that can be difficult, especially if you don't report the rape for months afterwards, and there's not even physical evidence of sex taking place. That is why we have an 85% unknown figure. So keep all this in mind for the analogies that Rebecca Watson's about to come up with. Keep in mind that using her stats, 8% are false, and using the English stats, which come from government sources, 7% are proven, and the other 85% is simply unknown.
Another common skeptic phrase is, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. This was started most likely by a doctor by the name of Theodore Woodward at the University of Maryland, and he was conveying to his students that they should bias their thinking toward diseases that are more common, because not all diseases have an equal probability of being the disease that your patient has. The rare disease should still be in the back of your mind as a possibility, but you should start with the assumption that it is most likely going to be the common disease.
Okay, what if you lived in an area where the chances that the hoofbeats you're hearing are around 8% for zebras and around 7% for horses? Would it be logical to conclude that the hoofbeats you're hearing are horses without any further investigation? You know, considering there's a 85% chance that it could be something completely different or is simply unknown.
Skeptics use the zebra metaphor quite often. For instance, in a ghost investigation, if someone is claiming to hear knocking late at night, you should start off by knowing the probability of whether it is their dead grandfather or whether it could be an old furnace. You know that the furnace is much more likely, so you start by investigating that first. And only after you rule that out do you move on to other, less probable things, which, okay, could eventually include the ghost of their granddad knocking around the house.
Yes, but that would require investigation, wouldn't it, Rebecca? As you said, you would investigate that, and if it didn't turn out to be the furnace, then you would investigate something else. The key point here, though, is investigation, which is the opposite of listen and believe. It's the exact opposite of just believe the victim no matter what. And once again, we see she's using a supernatural thing like a ghost to try to exaggerate the rarity of false rape allegations. To use her horse-zebra metaphor from earlier, it would be like replacing the zebras with unicorns. We know that zebras are real, and we also know that unicorns aren't, and it would completely change the metaphor.
But again, when we change the topic from ghosts to rape, a lot of skeptics suddenly decide that those hoofbeats are equally likely to be either zebras or horses. And that rash could either be poison ivy or lupus. Equal probabilities of happening.
Yeah, if I went to the doctor with a rash, I would hope the doctor would investigate the rash rather than just playing the odds. You know, well, lupus is exceptionally rare, therefore it's probably not that. I'm just going to send you on your way home. Don't worry about it. It's probably nothing. Yeah, that's probably not a good doctor. I think I'd be asking for a second opinion. What the doctor would do is investigate the rash. So he or she would look at the rash. They might ask you questions like, have you been rolling around in poison ivy? They might ask you if you've got any of the other symptoms of lupus. I'm not a doctor, I don't know what they are, but I'm sure they would ask. They might take blood samples. They might do some other type of testing. But what they wouldn't do, hopefully, is just send you home without even looking at it, because chances are it's not lupus. Now, once again, looking at Becky's metaphor, but using the statistics that we looked at earlier, that would mean there would be an 8% chance that it's lupus, a 7% chance that it's poison ivy, and an 85% chance of it being something else or unknown. So the doctor concluding that it's poison ivy and sending you home is probably not a good idea. Or possibly it's just a really bad metaphor used by Becky. Big surprise.
So why is this? I can think of a few reasons. If you are raised in a society that sees ghosts as being absolutely as probable as an old furnace, then you are likely to believe that the knocking in your house is coming from your dead grandfather rather than the furnace, because in your head, they have an equal likelihood of happening. Skeptics generally understand that this isn't so, that ghosts have a very low probability of existing compared to old furnaces. And if you're raised in a society that tells you that there's an equal probability that someone might be raped as there is that someone might be lying about rape.
Who is saying that? All anyone is saying is that we should investigate the claims which are made with an open mind and not decide who is guilty and who is innocent based on the gender of the person making the accusation. I think this is reasonable and pretty straightforward. Now, once again, Becky is using the metaphor of believing in ghosts because apparently rape claims are so incredibly rare that it's just like believing in ghosts. So what exactly is a false rape claim? Well, it's someone lying, isn't it? Are we to believe that someone lying is as unbelievable or as an extraordinary claim as believing in ghosts? I'll let you contemplate that for a moment.
Then you will move forward with the idea that these are two equal probabilities, even when you are faced with hard evidence that they are not.
Faced with hard evidence. So what was that hard evidence again? Oh, that's right. Hearsay from a book written in 1975 about one small area of New York. Apparently that's all the hard evidence that we need to conclude that false rape claims are as rare as ghosts. Right, Becky?
Now, just to be crystal clear for the pedants out there, no, I don't think that false rape accusations happen with the same frequency as a person talking to the dead or the dead walking around your house. No, I just think that in all of these cases, we always need to consider probabilities as one line of evidence. The 98-2 probability is an important one when it comes to false rape accusations. In other words, before I give up on the idea that it's a horse, I just want to see a couple stripes.
Now, when you're talking about something which is supernatural, Rebecca Watson is 100% correct. You should always try to explain it with natural causes first, right? You should go through every possible natural cause or explanation to see if it explains what the thing is you're looking at or you've seen. If there's a light in the sky, instead of assuming that it's aliens who have come to kidnap you, you should first of all explore more common and reasonable explanations, like it being a plane or whatever. And you shouldn't start with the assumption that it's a ghost or a UFO or whatever. And I often see people who want to believe in ghosts or UFOs ignoring or excluding or dismissing more reasonable, more common, natural explanations because they're starting from a bias viewpoint. Now, it's very different when you're talking about things which are part of the natural world and are very common and very everyday and aren't supernatural in nature. Someone lying, for whatever reason, is a very common thing. It is something we've all experienced and most likely all done ourselves. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone has lied about a rape allegation, but basically that's what a rape allegation is. It is someone lying for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of a mental disorder. Maybe it's revenge on someone. Maybe it's attention seeking. Maybe it's someone looking for an excuse for something that they've done and regret it. There are numerous cases which clearly demonstrate these reasons and more. Now, I'm not suggesting whenever you hear a rape claim that you should start from the viewpoint that the person is lying. Obviously, that's wrong. You should start from a neutral viewpoint. You should examine the evidence. You should listen to the person who's been accused as well, because they may have evidence which exonerates them. And once you've examined as much evidence as possible, then you should possibly come to your conclusion. I say possibly because even then it can be hard to determine who is telling the truth. More often than not, it is a he says, she says situation, and you can't know 100%. But when you start from the position that anyone who is making a claim has to be telling the truth because, geez, you know, those false rape allegations are only 2% and they're as rare as ghosts, then you're starting from a position of bias. And you're really no different than a conspiracy theorist who, whenever they see a light in the sky, thinks UFO instead of asking, gee, I wonder what the fuck that is. Now onto the topic of Lawrence Krauss. Now, the question is, did he sexually assault numerous women? I don't know. I honestly don't know. That's the honest answer. Now, there are some claims which do sound like they might be legitimate.
And at some point I find myself waiting in line at the bar to get a drink. In front of me there's one other person, a conference goer, and I was looking around and I see behind me there's freaking Lawrence Krauss. And he sees me looking at him, he smiles at me, so then I turn around and I say, "Oh, how nice to see you again. I don't know if you remember me, but we met at 10. Mind you, I say this with a big smile on my face, because guess what? I was happy because I was talking to Lawrence Krauss. But I did not touch him, I did not hug him, I did not shake his hand. There was no kind of physical contact from me towards him. Okay? Okay. So I tell him, yeah, we met at 10, whatever. And what does he do? Right there, in front of people, waiting in line to get drinks. He reaches down, grabs the bottom of my mini dress, which by the way was short, and tells me, "Yeah, I think you were wearing the same dress at 10 too, right?" And while he's saying this to me, the back of his hand is literally on my thigh, on my upper thigh, okay, like this. And then he also turns his hand around and does one of these. I don't think I'm showing this right, hold on. So just pretend that this piece of jeans here is actually the bottom of my dress, and it was just about this short. So he grabs the bottom of it, the back of his palm is, oh damn it, this is so freaking cringe and awkward. Okay, the back of his palm is on my thigh, touching my thigh, like glued to it, okay? Tells me that he saw me in this dress before, and then turns his hand around and runs it across my leg like this. Now my immediate reaction to this was, I was just shocked. So my reaction wasn't as strong as it should have been. Maybe I just flinched away and kind of laughed nervously. But in my head, obviously, I was like, dude, how about don't touch me? Also about that dress comment, I mean, freaking rude. Yeah, I'm from Romania, I'm poor, I have one good black dress, I wear it at all events. Do you gotta point that out?
And then there are some other claims which I'm extremely skeptical about. For example, this one from Rebecca Watson.
They even apparently dismissed the photographic evidence in which Krauss has his hand over a woman's breast. Krauss's amazing explanation for this is that he was actually putting his hand up to stop the photo from being taken with flash. Because that's what you do. When someone takes a photo of you, you assume that there's going to be a flash, and to combat that, you put your hand over the breast of the nearest woman.
Wow, that sounds pretty damning, right? Photographic evidence of Krauss grabbing a woman on the breast. I'm a little bit surprised Rebecca Watson didn't show the photo so we could all see it, and it would prove beyond a doubt what a monster that Krauss is, right? I mean, if you've got evidence, you should actually show it as opposed to just talking about it. But the thing is, I suspect Rebecca Watson hasn't actually seen the photo. Now, to be fair, I haven't seen it either. I couldn't find it online. It's mentioned in the BuzzFeed article, but they don't actually show it for some reason. But what the BuzzFeed article says and what Rebecca Watson says, they don't match up entirely. BuzzFeed says, the photo in question shows Krauss's hand in motion in front of the woman's shoulder, which is a little bit different than a photo of him grabbing her breast. Now, BuzzFeed does quote numerous witnesses who apparently saw him grab her breast. The woman in question, though, didn't press any charges. And the woman who took the photo is apparently part of one of these whisper networks, as BuzzFeed has put it. And she was warned about Krauss beforehand. Now, this makes me a little bit suspicious. When you have somebody making a claim about someone and they were warned beforehand and they might have a pre-existing bias, I have to wonder how reliable this information is. Now, maybe he did grab her breast, and maybe the photo actually shows that. Or maybe it's as Krauss says, he was putting his hand up because of the flash or something. It's hard to tell without actually seeing the photo. So Melanie Thompson, the person who took the photo, also put in some complaints at some of the universities where Krauss was going to speak. they investigated and found that there was no evidence in the photo. So I honestly don't know if Krauss has done any of the things he's been accused of. It wouldn't surprise me if the truth laid somewhere in the middle, that he has done some of the things, and at the same time, some of the claims have been manufactured or exaggerated, and Rebecca Watson gives us a perfect example of that. This is the importance of actually showing evidence, as opposed to just talking about evidence. When you just make a claim and you don't show it, you don't show your evidence, it's easy for that evidence to be distorted or exaggerated. It's like if someone came up to you and said they have a photo of a UFO or a ghost. The first thing I would be doing is saying, can I see it? And if they said, no, you just have to take my word for it, that would make me a little bit suspicious that maybe the photo isn't as clear as they're claiming.